my story was headed, "It will never happen to me," and I thought I'd start with that because it's the sort of thing when you have a stroke, you don't expect it, and it comes as a considerable surprise. And this is partly because I think as humans, we feel we're infallible and nothing is ever really going to happen to us that we can't overcome. And I think that in the end is actually a truism, because you can overcome whatever does happen to you. But the fact that it does is the big shock. And so I sort of said, well, I thought when I was thinking about the article I was going to write, I thought, well, it will never happen to me, which was really the way I thought. Not for any reason other than I didn't expect it. And so from that point of view, that's the reasoning behind the heading. I think probably it will never happen to me. You know, we do feel that we're totally in charge of our destiny, and I think this is rather more related, I think, to men than women, because I think men feel they're indestructible, and it's sort of one of those things that we go through life, and nothing's ever going to happen to me. I can handle it, and all the rest of it. And the reality of it is that's not the case. So we'll come back to that, I think, in a little while, but a bit more about my background, I think. I had an interesting childhood because my father was Sir Robert Kerridge, who was involved with the Kerridge cinema chain, plus a lot of other fairly entrepreneurial activities. And it was an interesting life in that obviously I had a lot of benefits in coming from that family. I remember one of them was I was taken away from school at a fairly early age, and when I say an early age, it was about 10 or 11, and was told that I was going to have a world trip. And so I thought, well, this sounds very exciting. And so we went to Canada, we went to Hollywood, we went to England, and that was mainly the extent of it. But the experiences along the way were really life-changing experiences, because for the first time at a very early age, I was out there in the big world discovering things that beforehand were only just things that I thought I would never experience. And the one or two little things do pop into my mind, which I'll share with you. When we were in Hollywood, of course, the land of the stars, I was very fortunate to shake Lassie's paw. And that, I'm sure, didn't affect Lassie too much, but it certainly had a big impression on me. I found out afterwards that there were, in fact, 7 Lassies, and that they used to rotate them according to the role that they wanted to put him through. Some other experiences too. I met Sam Goldwyn of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, Jack Warner, who was Warner Brothers, the Cecil B. DeMille, who was one of the great spectacular producers. And my memory of Cecil B was they were filming Samson and Delilah, and on the set, and it was the temple scene where Samson pulls all the collars and pillars of the temple down. I was amazed to see that, in fact, it could be done, because everything was made out of polystyrene. And in between takes, as they call them, people used to walk around in their clothing, of course, their Roman clothing, with spears through their bodies and all sorts of things. So that was really quite an eye-opener. The other thing, of course, was outside of Cecil B, was Alfred Hitchcock, who was an absolute character. And really, he did some of the best mysteries, and that was a great meeting as well. And in England as well, my father asked me at the end of the trip which place I enjoyed the most, and I said, "Oh, I just loved England." Which came as a surprise to him, because he thought probably all the glitz of Hollywood would have stayed with me. But in actual fact, I loved England because it is the old country. It has so many wonderful historical things that you can experience. It has an atmosphere all of its own, the little English pubs and all the rest of it. And not that I went to the pub, of course, as a child. It just struck me as being the country that appealed to me. And I think it probably was my roots, because my early ancestors came out to Akaroa in one of the first sailing ships, and they were from Sussex. So I think probably the roots came through. But that was just, the early stages. Then I had went to boarding school. I boarded as a youngster, and also as when I went to secondary school. And that was really where I suppose everything came together for me in terms of finding my life. Near the end of my college years, I basically had determined that I was going to spend half of my life working and making a lot of money, I might say, but I didn't. And the second half working for a charity. And that's exactly how it panned out. When I left school, I worked with an insurance company, the Sun Insurance, and eventually joined the Rank organisation as a trainee manager. So that's how I got into the theatrical business, and obviously with a view when I came back to New Zealand, working there with my father. And that I did for a few years, and he was a good boss, but a tough one. And I decided, no, I think I'd like to try and do my own commercial thing, which I did. Started an advertising agency and then a marketing consultancy, got into television film distribution at an early age, and all that sort of all happened when the electronic business began to take over. In terms of television and other such things, we got into games, the ping pong game. Some of you might remember it as Sportronic, and that was a little ping pong game that we manufactured and distributed and sold, and that was quite an interesting thing. But like all things, the commercial world has a strange way of dealing very funny hands. And we weren't selling, well, we sold a lot to start with, but then when sales dipped down, we had this factory that I didn't know what to do with, and the marketing consultancy had taken back seat. And I thought, no, time for the charity work. And I was actually looking forward to doing that. So I saw an advertisement for a GM for SPCA. And I applied for that and was very fortunate in getting it. It was the best thing that could have ever happened, because it was a charity that I loved, because I loved animals from a child, and not just the Lassie experience, I might add. And obviously I wanted to help them as best I could. And so I eagerly snapped the job and started. My first board meeting was an interesting one. We used to have board meetings at 7 o'clock, which used to finish just after midnight. And they were long meetings where we talked about all sorts of things, none of them of much meaning. We had a wonderful committee of people who just wanted to help animals, but they had no business sense at all, sadly, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but they just weren't commercial people. And I sort of wondered what I'd actually come to. And there was one time in the first meeting that I had, it got a little bit heated amongst the attendees, and one threw an ashtray at the other, which sort of had some impact, I might add, not physical, but it had an impact on me. And I thought, well, I don't know what I've come into. But as time went on, obviously things improved. There were some wonderful times at SPCA. It was a very stressful job, because I think in animal welfare you do get so involved with the people you are and the animals that you're helping. And I say people and animals because both go hand in hand. People have problems or things that they want to discuss or have traumas with animals. And of course, animals themselves go through their own ordeals as well. And so from that point of view, it was a strenuous job, but I had a philosophy that I was doing what I wanted to do. I was helping those that I could help, and it gave me that sort of satisfaction. So I would go home at night feeling contented with what I'd achieved in the day on most days. There was a certain frustration went with it. I've got to say, the frustration of legislation, for want of a general term, getting things done that would benefit animals took an age, and having to go through the parliamentary process and all the things that go with it. The main things that happened to benefit animals took me probably 5, 6, even maybe 7 years to achieve. So it was a slow process, but worth it in the end, because when you get there and you do achieve, you think, oh yes, that's the step up for the animals. And that's exactly what everything was about, making life better for animals and making life beautiful for animals. And so that was really the passion. I could tell many stories about SPCA, but I'm not going to bore you completely with that, because I could go on and on forever. But there were some wonderful times. I must admit, when I first joined, we were basically, as an organisation, we were broke. And so the first thing I said is that we need to get some reserves in. And so I established the SPCA Trust in virtually my first year there. And the trust was charged with receiving monies and putting a certain amount aside for what I would term the rainy day. But that was motivated by the fact that paying bills was always a problem, because if we didn't have the money, we couldn't pay the bills, obviously. And so my predecessor used to put all the invoices, not statements, but invoices, into a cardboard box. And on Friday, we would see what money had come into the bank. We would select a number of lucky checks to be sent out from the box. And that was how we ran the business. And I thought, this is not a way to run a railroad. So that's why we started the trust. And within about a year or so, the trust developed into something very large. And it finished up with some millions in the trust account. So that was the first, I guess, achievement. Then I think probably the main milestones was when we got sentience included in the Animal Welfare Act. I always had this belief that animals were capable of feeling pain, suffering, just as we humans do. And the word sentient sums all that up. And I was determined to try and weave that into the Animal Welfare Act, because at that stage, New Zealand didn't recognise sentience. And very early on, and after about 5 years, 6 years in that case, we actually got sentience written into the Animal Welfare Act, and that was a big achievement. We started a program called Outreach, and this is where the animals are taken to rest homes, hospices, other such organisations, and we go to the patients, as it were, and we sit the animal on the bed if it's a cat, or take the dog in, and we bring therapy to the people that are there. And what a therapy it is, because animals are great healers, wonderful, wonderful healers. And there were many occasions with Outreach where we would go out with our animals, and the expressions of delight that people would have just encountering, and the memories they would have. And many of the people we went to had Alzheimer's and other such ailments, but they would remember for a short while an animal that they had many years ago, and it would just bring them such joy. So they would sit there and you would see the smiles come across their faces and the relief that they actually had. So outreach probably is one of the things that I started that probably gave me the most joy because, again, it brought so much joy to other people. And you know, that is so important. So outreach was definitely something that I put way up there as an achievement. I started the Companion Animal Council. The reason for that was that I wanted an independent organisation, a charity again, but an independent organisation that would basically hear everyone. By that I mean SPCA was to a certain extent closeted because we would work under our own rules and that sort of thing. But animal welfare is a much wider thing and has many more ramifications. And so the Companion Animal Council was an independent council of free-thinking people, and we had a membership of up to 500 at one stage, and that was really to achieve things that we couldn't have achieved at the SPCA, and we did achieve many things. And I won't go into great detail, but we had a number of conferences where we invited top flight people who came and spoke to us and inspired us generally. And we also had a number of, we wrote the first cat code of welfare. We then did the dog code of welfare, and then we did the temporary housing. Those are three big things that eventually were written into law with MPI. So these were again achievements, milestones, I guess, in making the progress to improve the lot for animals. Am I raving too much, or is it all right? So that was again the achievements of there. And the one other thing that gave a lot of joy, and it really came from the trust that I first organised. We had a thing that we called the Circle, which was where animal people who loved animals and who had determined to leave a gift in their wills to animals, to help animals. We wanted to recognise them during their lifetime. So we started a series of wonderful events. We had 3 a year, which was designed purely to entertain them, but also to thank them. And this was called the Circle. And the Circle was really one of the great delights I had in terms of being able to thank people for doing what they had done, because we rely, obviously, as everyone does, on funding. Legacies is obviously a major part of that funding, and this recognition was so important to be able to say thank you to these people. And we had some wonderful events which involved them, but it was the big way of saying thank you so much for being who you are and for doing what you're doing. And that's a very important thing. So that was a little bit of the time at SPCA. There are many, many other stories that I could tell, and I didn't want to get into too much detail, but I hope that's given you a little bit of a background as to some of the milestone achievements that I felt I made through that time. Then it came time for retirement, and I retired fairly late when you think about it, because I'd been there over 30 years, as you said. And I sort of thought, really, I think probably it is time that I step down. Excuse me. And because I knew that there are many other people out there with wonderful ideas who could do wonderful things, and it was time for me to just step aside and let them do it. And so retiring was a difficult thing. One, because we had to change the pattern of life. which you do, because when you're working and certainly getting energy from working and satisfaction from working, it really is, well, it consumes you to a great extent. I must admit, SPCA did a bit consume me. And so that stops. And although we had a number of animals, of course, we always had animals that we lived with, that really almost was my only, for want of a better word, hobby. And so I needed to sort of readjust to all of that. Then my wife and I decided, because we're going to change our life substantially with retirement, that we might as well look at where we wanted to live in those sort of twilight years. And so we settled on Havelock North, and we don't regret it for 1 minute. I've got to say that I was inspired. Just before I left the SPCA, we had one of the branches and member societies was having some financial difficulties, and it involved some legal work. So our legal people, Russell McVeigh and I, came down to Hastings and did what we had to do. And that night, the legal people said, "You must come to dinner with us." So I thought, well, that's a jolly good idea. And so we went off to Craggy Range. And I remember getting out of the car and looking at the majesty of that range. And I was just inspired. And I thought, this is just so powerful and so beautiful. I think this is where we're going to settle. So I hot-tailed it back to Auckland, and I said to Michelle, I said, I'm going to take you somewhere for a weekend, and I'm not going to tell you where. And so we came off on our mystery trip, and I took her to Craggy Range, where we actually had rented a little cottage in the vineyard, which is just beautiful. And she, again, was so inspired by the sight of this beautiful range, but the energies that come off it, which we both feel. She said, yes, this is where we come. So we came to Havelock North, and we're now settled in Mary Doyle, which is a retirement village, which again is something I thought I'd never do, but I'm glad we did, because obviously it's security, and that's very, very important. And so came to selling the house. Now I look at Auckland prices, which have gone up by just over 20-something% in the last year. We tried to sell our house, unfortunately, before things started to happen and started to rise. So we're at a very low stage, I guess, of downsizing, and it took us a year to sell the house, which is terrible. And eventually, well, we thought, no, we must sell it. So we did. And that's exactly what happened. But there was a bit of a strain that went with it. And I mention that because I think one of the most traumatic things one has to do in one's life involves selling houses. It really is a drama. And I have a strange feeling that my little stroke might have been related to that, although it happened a few years after it. But I think the strain of that, it really told. However, we made it down to Havelock, and as I say, we're very happy that we have. So that's sort of a little bit, I hope, to help you know me a little better, and I'm going to be very happy to take questions that you might have a little later on. But coming to the stroke, and again, it wouldn't ever happen to me. Well, it did, and it happened mercifully. It was not a major stroke, but I woke up one morning, and I said to Michelle, I don't feel 100%. I didn't know what it was. I had some sort of pins and needles in my fingers, which made them a little numb, and I thought that's a bit strange. But I'd always been told, and I always believed it, that if you ever feel that something is not quite right medically, do something about it. Don't muck around. Don't wait. Just do something about it. So we made an appointment with our doctor down here, and he just looked at me and he said, "Well, you've just had a stroke." And so he made immediate arrangements to get me into Hastings Hospital, where I might say I was beautifully looked after. And I have to give it a little aside here. In the stroke department, I came across one of our best inspectors in Auckland, animal welfare inspectors in Auckland, who had come down to Hastings and had now joined the medical profession and was the head nurse in the stroke department. So that was a delightful meeting, and that certainly helped get me better quickly, I think. So anyway, that was sort of how it happened, and I suppose it's time to ponder on really what effect does that have. I have since met a lot of people when I first had my stroke, and it was wonderful to have their support, their encouragement. They gave me little exercises to do. They told me what to look out for. They told me to rest. They told me all sorts of things, and I dutifully did what I was told, I might add, which I wasn't used to doing, of course. And they really did sort of put me in the right direction. But I've also met other people who have been stroke victims, and since I had my own, and we've all chatted about it. And I think that the common thing is that firstly, you having got what you thought you'd never have, you actually learn to accept it. And I think that's the first thing that you must do. You say, fine, this has happened. Don't fight it in terms of, trying to reject it, because it has happened and you just have to cope with it. And that's the sort of discussions I had with people in general. There is a determination in me, and it's always been inherent in me, I must admit, that I won't let setbacks stop me. And so one of the first things I did after the stroke and I started to recover, I said, this is not going to get me. I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to concern myself with it, but I am going to do what I have to do to stop it happening again if I can. And so the focus was on that, but it certainly wasn't going to stop me in my tracks. And of course, with animals, and then getting back to animals again, there's always things to do. And I have, in fact, got involved. I started a welfare, an animal welfare trust to try and help younger people into animal welfare. And so that's occupied my mind. One of the big issues that carried on after I left the SPCA is the matter of management of cats, which became a very stormy thing with the emergence of Gareth Morgan and some of the things he had to say about cats, which I didn't agree with, of course. And it started a bit of a movement, a bit of an anti-cat movement. So I've also been fighting that during my time, my retirement time, because cats are our most popular companion animal in New Zealand. There are a number of families that love the company of cats and love what they do for them in terms of stimulus and other such things. So I sort of thought, no, I'm not going to let this one go. So I have been battling the anti-cat brigade, as I call them, and on a consistent basis ever since I've retired, and I'm still doing that. I don't know what got me onto that, but it was the stroke, I guess. So I thought, no, I'm going to carry on and do the best I can. There have been side effects. I think, certainly you know that you've had a stroke and that some parts of you are perhaps not quite as they used to be. That's a combination, I think, of age and rusting up, but also the effects of stroke. They do live with you, and again, you just learn to cope with them. But that's the thing that probably has affected me most, is just losing. Well, I must admit, when I first had the stroke, of course, I sat in front of the computer screen and said, "What do I do now?" And that was a bit of a shock, because I'd worked on the computer for many, many years. And I looked at, what do I press now? What do I do now? Which was a real eye-opener, because things that you think are automatic to you, you actually have to relearn. And that really was a bit of a shock to the system. And it takes a little while. It doesn't happen overnight. And I think even now I do have little spasms where I sit in front of the screen or something and I say, what do I do now? I just have that temporary lapse. Soon overcome it, but you have that temporary lapse. So there are some things that occur following a stroke. I've got to say that I was very, very fortunate in not having what I would term a major stroke. I was reading in this morning's paper that a 20-year-old league player has had a massive stroke, just reported today. So it can happen to anyone at any time. And so you just have to sort of accept all that. But I think probably the other thing I sort of really want to say about the stroke is that although it does concern you, you don't have to carry on worrying about, will it happen again? Because the what ifs of this world may never happen. Sometimes they do. And when they do, you have to do something about it. But don't worry about what if this happens, because what if may never happen. And that, to my mind, is probably a philosophy that I've lived with since the stroke, where I'm saying, no, I'm not going to say what if. I'm not going to say this is, I'm not going to worry about things that haven't happened yet. I'll worry about it when it happens, but only then. So, you can never guarantee that it will never happen again, but I don't labour on it. And I think that's, again, an important message I'd like to share with other people as well. So that's sort of my ramblings for the moment. I'm very happy to answer some questions that you may have. I don't know how long I've raved for. I haven't actually checked the watch, but not too bad. But I hope it's been interesting.
Thank you so much, Bob. It's been really great. I have muted all of you, so if you do have questions, just unmute yourself. Bob, I do have a couple of questions myself. First of all, what does stroke mean to you and your family?
I think, well, it again goes back to what I sort of said. It's not going to happen to me. And when it comes to my family, that's everything that happens to you in life involves the family, obviously. And the first thought is there. Now, I'm very, very lucky that I have a wonderful wife who has taken amazing care of me, to the point, she watches, obviously, the diet and all sorts of other things that need to be cared for and catered to. And she has the added burden of my now having macula, which is a problem. And so she now shows me where to walk and what to do and so forth and so on. So she has a double burden. So the first thing I say is the burden and the effect on your family is great, but the one thing it does is it strengthens the bond. And that's the big thing, that when things do happen to you, particularly health-wise, your bond gets much deeper and much stronger.
Lovely. And what words of support would you give to someone who, let's say, recently had a stroke and they might be really struggling to cope with the changes and with what had happened? Are there any words of support that you would give to them?
I think again I can only work off the sort of the personal experience. So number one, there was the shock of it. Number two was the determination to overcome it. Number three was what you have to do to try and prevent it happening again, in the belief that it might, but yet again it might not. So you don't labour, and this is number four, you don't labour too much on happening again. In terms of personal things that I would sort of pass on to other people, I think the most important thing is that life does bring up a whole variety of things, of issues, of problems, and also of joy. And the important thing is to enjoy as much as you can, enjoy what you have, cherish it, live by it and love it, because stroke mustn't change your entire life. It might affect it in some ways, but don't let it control you. Be above it and live for the moment.